welcome back. I have taken kind of a bit of a break from recording content because just kind of was focusing on enjoying myself for a little bit. It's been a process, going through therapy and getting back to being social again. So I'm back now. Well, and I hope you all have been well. I hope your day has been pleasant. And if not pleasant, then take a deep breath here and now and choose to make it pleasant. We really do have all the control we need for even our thoughts and our emotions. And you just have to keep flexing the mind. Keep flexing that mind muscle, guys. Get swole. So what I really want to talk to you guys about is, something I kind of struggle with personally is, cognitive distortions and some negative thought patterns. And I'm currently working to overcome them myself. So remember, friends, no rain, no flowers. Every storm runs out of rain. And after the rain passes, we can choose to look at the blooming flowers or the muddy puddles. It's always about choice. Is your glass half full, half empty, or full of floaties? So it turns out there's actually a name for these type of perspectives, or rather patterns, really. So if we can break these patterns, we can break these feelings. So literally the key to changing your reactions is to change your thoughts on the situation. When we're feeling down, when we tend to interpret things through a negative spyglass, it looks a lot closer and bigger than it actually is. And our body interprets it as such. The more that we kind of repeat this type of perspective, it becomes this permanent lens in which we view our lives and the world. And this can really result in elongated anxiety or feelings of sadness and depression. This can create reoccurring issues in our lives that can interrupt our pursuit of happiness. But have hope, friends. We can throw these glasses down and choose the specs that work best for us. It does take some work, and you'll only get better by practicing it. So what we can do is by observing these thoughts and then challenging them and reframing the thought in a positive way, we can actually alter the way that we experience the moment. Think of all the power that you have in your hands in that moment. You can literally rewrite what you process and make it reflexive. So let's talk about it. There are actually several types of different distortions. So we can reassort them and be a bit more constructive in our perception and deserting of that mental deception, an experience of our own conception. So let's cover the first of several different types of cognitive distortions. I'm going to talk about polarized thinking first. So polarized thinking is sometimes called all or nothing, or black and white thinking. This distortion occurs when people habitually think in extremes. When you're convinced that you're either destined for success or doomed to failure, that the people in your life are either angelic or evil, you're probably engaging in polarized thinking. This kind of distortion is unrealistic and often unhelpful because most of the time, reality exists somewhere between the two extremes. And then there's overgeneralization. Overgeneralization is when people overgeneralize. They reach a conclusion about one event and then incorrectly apply the conclusion across the board. For example, let's say you make a low score on one math test and conclude that you're hopeless at math in general. You have a negative experience in one relationship and develop a belief that you aren't good enough for a relationship at all. Overgeneralization has often been associated with post-traumatic stress disorder and other anxiety disorders. Catastrophizing. It's a really fun word to say, if you can get it right the first time. This is basically the distorted type of thinking that leads people to believe It leads them to dread or assume the worst when faced with the unknown. When people catastrophize, ordinary worries can quickly escalate. For instance, an expected check doesn't arrive in the mail. A person who catastrophizes may begin to fear it will never arrive, and that as a consequence, it won't be possible to pay rent, and the whole family may be evicted. It's easy to dismiss catastrophizing as a hysterical overreaction, but people who have developed the cognitive distortion may have experienced repeated adverse events, like chronic pain or childhood trauma, so often that they fear the worst in many situations. And then there's personalization. One of the most common errors in thinking is taking things personally when they're not connected to or caused by you at all. You may be engaging in personalization when you blame yourself for circumstances that aren't your fault or are beyond your control. Another example might be when you incorrectly assume that you've been intentionally excluded or targeted. Personalization has been associated with heightened anxiety and depression. Then there's mind reading. Wah, 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 wah. When people assume they know what others are thinking, they're resorting to mind reading. It can be hard to distinguish between mind reading and empathy, the ability to perceive and understand what others may be feeling. To tell the difference between the two, it might be helpful to consider all the evidence, not just the evidence that confirms your suspicions or beliefs. In at least one study, they've found that mind reading is more common among children than among adolescents or adults and is associated with anxiety. Next, there is mental filtering. This is another distorted thought pattern that is the tendency to ignore the positives and focus exclusively on the negatives. Interpreting circumstances using a negative mental filter is not only inaccurate, it can worsen anxiety and depression. So researchers have actually found that having a negative perspective of yourself and your future can cause feelings of hopelessness. These thoughts may become extreme enough to trigger suicidal thoughts. Next, there is discounting the positive. Like mental filters, discounting the positive involves a negative bias in thinking. People who tend to discount the positive don't ignore or overlook something positive. Instead, they explain it away as a fluke or sheer luck. Instead of acknowledging that a good outcome is a result of skill, smart choice, or determination, they assume that it must be an accident or some type of anomaly. When people believe they have no control over their circumstances, it can really reduce motivation and cultivate a sense of learned hopelessness. Next, should statements. When people find themselves thinking in terms of what should or ought to be said or done, it's possible that a cognitive distortion is at work. It's rarely helpful to chastise yourself with what you should be able to do in a given situation. Should and ought statements are often used by the thinker to take on a negative view of their life. These types of thoughts are often rooted in internalized family or cultural expectations, which might not be appropriate for an individual. Such thoughts can diminish your self-esteem and also raise your anxiety levels. Next, emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is the false belief that your emotions are the truth, that the way you feel about a situation is a reliable indicator of the reality. While it's important to listen to and validate and express your emotions, it's equally important to judge reality based on rational evidence. Researchers have also found that emotional reasoning is a common cognitive distortion. It's a pattern of thinking used by people with and without anxiety or depression. Next, labeling. Labeling is a cognitive distortion in which people reduce themselves or other people to a single, usually negative characteristic or descriptor, like drunk or failure or Jacob. When people label, they define themselves and others based on a single event or behavior. Labeling can really cause people to berate themselves. It can also cause the thinker to misunderstand or underestimate others. This misperception can cause real problems between people. Nobody wants to be labeled. So what can you do? how do we reframe this? How do we go about changing all these things about ourselves? Well, the good news is that cognitive distortions can be corrected over time. I'm going to share with you guys a couple steps on what you want to do to help change these thought patterns, and they may or may not be helpful. First, really, you want to identify the troublesome thought. When you realize a thought is causing anxiety or dampening your mood, a good first step is to figure out what kind of distorted thinking is taking place. To better understand your thoughts and how they affect your emotions and behaviors, you may want to consider reading Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy by clinical psychologist Dr. David Burns. This book is considered by many to be the definitive work on this subject. Next, we want to try and reframe the situation. Look for the shades of gray, alternative explanations, objective evidence, and positive interpretations to expand your thinking. You might find it helpful to write down your original thought, followed by 3 or 4 alternative interpretations, and then perform a cost-benefit analysis. People usually repeat behaviors that deliver some benefit. You might find it helpful to analyze how your thought patterns have helped you cope in the past. Do they give you a sense of control in situations where you feel powerless? Do they allow you to take or avoid taking responsibility or taking necessary risks? You can also ask yourself what engaging in cognitive distortions costs you. Weighing the pros and cons of your thought patterns could motivate you to change them. And then next, and I really recommend this, guys, if this is something you struggle with, it's something that I'm currently taking part in. Consider cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a widely recognized form of talk therapy in which people learn to identify, interrupt, and change unhealthy thinking patterns. If you'd like some guidance in identifying and changing this distorted thinking, you might find this type of therapy useful. CBT usually forces and focuses on specific goals. It generally takes place for a predetermined number of sessions, and it can take a couple weeks or even a few months to really see results. So make sure you look for a therapist who's properly certified and licensed in the state where you live. Your therapist may be trained in CBT. Try to find a therapist who has experience in treating your type of thinking pattern or issue. So next, guys, I want to take a moment to give a shout out to the people that have been instrumental in my process and have been a support system through my healing and grieving process. They've helped me determine many things and given me an outside perspective. And it truly does take a village to solve a problem in a way that is conducive and constructive. One person's ideas may not be a solution for the community. And these friends have talked me off a cliff or two, especially in these last couple months. So guys, I want to say thank you for being so fantastic and supportive. And as always, friends, have a fantastic day. I hope you attract love, abundance, and positivity in your life. I'm here today because I'm hoping to see you tomorrow. Be safe, friends.